Hey guys, it's Ice again. Got a review for today on the Schrade SCHF15 fixed blade knife. This is a knife that I actually EDC, everyday carry. I'll go over the stats real quick, then I'll get into opinions, blade theory, everything you need to know. The blade length is 3.4 inches. The handle length is 4.5 inches. The overall length is 7.9 inches. The weight is only 6 ounces, very lightweight. The shape is a Tonto blade design. The coating is a stone wash. The steel is 8CR13 high carbon stainless, about a mid-class 2 steel, comparable to 420 or 440 steels. It is a full tang knife with G10 handle scales with a what's called a Rocky Mountain grip pattern. The blade angle is quite obtuse. It's around a 22-degree angle either side. It is a plain edge, no serrations. The sheath is listed as GRN, which is basically the name of Zytel. I'll get into that later. Now the blade thickness, something they did not include in any of their online stats, which is ill-advised. Blade thickness, especially on a fixed blade, is extremely important. About 1/8 of an inch. It's pretty decent for its blade length. This knife is $31.92 with free shipping on Amazon. Alright, now I'm going to get into my opinions on this knife. You may recognize this knife. This knife's bigger brother, the Schrade SCHF12, is actually my profile picture currently down below. That one is a 5-inch blade. This is just 3.4. Now, I do a fixed blade EDC this knife, and this is my primary EDC. I just want to say right off the bat, this is an excellent everyday carry knife. I think you may recall my previous everyday carry knife was the Buck Packlight Large Skinner. Now, these two knives are very comparable. They do the same tasks roughly. They're the same size. While this is listed as 3.5 inches and this is listed as 3.4 inch blade, they actually have almost exactly the same blade length. If you look at where the edge starts and the handle ends. Also, up top, they're exactly the same overall length. These knives are very comparable. I'll get into the comparison later in the video. I'll go over the blade first. This blade is a Tonto blade. It's got a nice tactical swedge up top. This blade is very, very effective with puncturing through materials. It is a slight hollow grind. It's not very often that you see a knife this thin with a hollow grind, but that makes it a very good slicer. So there's not a whole lot of steel for the material to get around, so it's a very good slicer. Unfortunately, this blade has a very obtuse edge angle. Now, if you recall, this is the very famous USMC K-Bar Marine Combat Knife. Now, this has exactly a 20-degree edge angle on either side. My eye caught that this was at least 1.5 to 2 degrees more obtuse than that. Now, a 20-degree edge angle is standard. It's sort of the middle road between very sharp knives and very durable knives. Now, they definitely went with durability on this over sharpness. When this came out of the box, it was a very fine edge, but it was not incredibly sharp. You know, you could maybe get through some paper, but it was a very obtuse edge angle. So that's definitely something to be noted. With this obtuse edge angle, it's really meant to be a survival bushcraft knife. This is not meant to be, incredibly sharp like an X-Acto blade, which is a little disappointing seeing as it is a Tonto design. And Tonto's one of the great benefits is that with that flat edge right there, you can use it for utility. But with such a obtuse edge angle, you really can't. On top of that, the steel is not very good either. I have taken this out in the wilderness and beat on it quite a bit, and the edge hasn't held up all too well. I can run this along my skin and not cut myself. I can't, the soft skin of the inside of the wrist, you can't do that with a lot of knives. So after just one beating, this edge has already been dulled down quite a bit, And that's sort of disappointing given the fact that this is such an obtuse edge angle. I would have thought it would be more durable than that. So the steel is definitely inferior, something to be noted. It is a stainless steel, which is a bonus, especially for an EDC knife. When comparing this to this Buck Packlight Large Skinner, this is an excellent slicer because it has about a 20-degree edge angle, so it's sharper than this, and it has a deeper hollow grind, and the hollow grind makes its way further up the blade. You can see the hollow grind ends about 40% up the blade, whereas with this, the hollow grind ends about 70% of the way up the blade. So you can see this has a much better deep hollow grind, plus it's a thicker blade, so it allows for a deeper hollow grind. Along with that recurve and the acute edge angle, this is a monster slicer. This is not, because it has a straight edge instead of the recurve. It has the shallower hollow grind that comes further down, increasing the grind angle, and it has a more obtuse edge angle. So this is not a very good slicer. If they had moved that hollow grind a little farther up, made it a little deeper, and decreased that edge angle, this would be a beastly sharp knife. You can certainly do that yourself by just decreasing the edge angle, but that would be a lot of work. Now, on the edge angle being so obtuse, it's not very sharp, and it would be very difficult to actually make that angle more acute because you'd be taking off a lot of steel. Like I mentioned in my previous video, it's a lot easier to start out with a very acute edge angle because it's way easier to grind off steel and decrease that angle on the fragile edge than it is to grind off the back of the edge per se, which would be increasing the secondary grind, which is definitely not a good thing. I just think it would be much better to have a acute edge angle, especially with a hollow grind. It'd just be very nice to have it that much better of a slicer. It does come with a stonewash finish. Absolutely excellent choice for this knife. It really finishes it off well, complements the knife design very well, the gunmetal look. My only issue with the gunmetal stonewash finish previously was that I thought it would be very fragile, very temporary coating. Much to my surprise, after beating the crap out of this knife in the wild, one of the toughest things on this blade was the finish. You know, the only change, the only inconsistency I found in the finish is this little nick right there. And that's just from a scratch as material moved up the swedge onto the face. And, you know, that's bound to happen on every knife. Damage to the finish around the face. So, I mean, I'm very impressed with this stonewash finish. It's very tough, it's very durable, and I think it was a great choice for this knife. Now, all the labeling on this bonus here is engraved. So the Schrade right here is actually set into the knife. Same with right here, the SCHF15 lettering is set into the knife. So even after the coating wears off, it's still going to be there. Great bonus points right there. Even if the coating wears off the entire blade, not only will the engraving be there, but the coating is actually set into the blade. So I don't think that coating inside the lettering will ever go away. It's very protected by the face. Now the Tonto design on this blade is excellent in my opinion. They use a very wide blade. Now when I say wide, I don't mean thick. Thickness and thinness is referring to the actual blade steel. Wide and narrow is referring to the overall face of the blade. So this is a very wide blade. This is a very narrow blade. I definitely prefer wide blades for a number of reasons. One of them is that especially with such a cheap steel, you're going to be sharpening this up a lot, you're going to be taking a lot of steel off over the years, and so an issue with that is if you have a narrow blade, you know, 10, 15 years down the road, you might not have much of a knife left. You've ground off so much steel. So it's really nice to have all this distance to really grind down if you need to. Leaves a lot of room for versatility and longevity in a knife. So bonus points on that, definitely. It's still very effective at puncturing through materials. This is a wicked tip. This is one of the best puncturer knives that I have, and I have a lot of Tontos. So that's saying a lot. This is a very good, sharp tip. That's one of the best bonuses of this knife, especially in a combat situation. Probably the most common attack that you would use is a stab, is the use of the tip over the edge. So it's very, very functional, especially in a self-defense knife, in a tactical knife, to have a Tonto tip. That's why it's so prevalent in tactical knives. Now another thing is that if you were to take these handle scales off, it would be incredibly good for chopping. I found this very effective in the wilderness when I was using this, that you can actually, even with just a 3.4-inch blade, I thought that was way below the range of getting enough momentum to have effective chopping capabilities. But believe it or not, since the blade is so wide up here, you can actually bring your hand down onto this curve in the handle, which is still very comfortable, and you can really get a lot of chopping power with all this blade steel weight up here. Especially if you were to take these handle scales off, almost all of the weight would be up here, and it'd just be like an axe. It'd just be like a mini hatchet. It's very effective for chopping. Issues I've seen with flat blades, like the Tonto or the Wharncliffe, where the edge is flat instead of curved, there comes issues, especially with sharpening. Not just getting around that corner, but when you're sharpening a Wharncliffe or a Tonto blade, oftentimes you spend a lot more time sharpening the middle than you do the edges. What happens then is it gets curved inwards. And the issue with that is that, as I said before, with an inward curved blade, it's very difficult to sharpen after that. So it's nice to at least have even just a slight outward curve to prevent that from happening. Even with this Tonto edge up here, the secondary edge, you can already see it's actually already going in. I haven't even sharpened this yet, and you can actually see there's a little bit of a shadow under the middle of the blade, which is ridiculous. I didn't think it would actually come with a blade that's already having that problem. Now, it's not a huge issue, especially if you're on a belt grinder, it doesn't even matter. But if you're on flat stones, if you have one or two knives and you're only sharpening it with a flat stone, it's definitely something to take into consideration. Now, this has a wicked point because of that slight inward curve, however. This point is just so sharp and exposed, yet very tough because of how far the thick face actually comes up to the point. So excellent design for toughness yet sharpness, in my opinion there. Now I'll move on to the handle. This handle is absolutely excellent in my opinion for both bushcraft, survival, and tactical use. I was amazed that they had G10 handle scales on such a cheap knife. Usually with G10 handle scales, if you have as intricate ones as these, they usually don't come that cheap for around a $30 knife. So I was very impressed with that. Definitely superior handle material than a lot of blades in its class. And of course it is black G10, which everyone loves. Now this G10 has what's called the Rocky Mountain pattern. And essentially it's just grooves or choils of material carved out where the fingers will land. So if you look up here, as your finger wraps around, depending on which angle it's going to go into one of these choils. With your middle finger, it's going to go into this one, ring finger, pinky, respectively. Makes for a very firm grip. And then in the back grip, it's definitely not unusable. A lot of knives have a choil that comes out so far you can't even hold the knife like this. It's not the case with this one, so great versatility points on that. Now another thing to mention is the handle scales are interchangeable. If you find others online or even design your own, since there are screws here for removal, you can redesign your own G10, micarta, whatever you want, handle scales. Another thing to mention is the very easy switching of grips with this knife because of the Rocky Mountain pattern of handle scale. It's very easy to flip this around and change grips easily. So definitely bonus points there. This is a very long handle, it's very comfortable. The handle scales really fill out the palm. One bad thing I have to say about the G10 is this surface right here. While it does look like the surface of a lot of other G10 handles, this is not nearly as grippy as, say for example, the Benchmade 810 Contigo, which I said in my other videos described as supernaturally grippy. This is not. This is relatively smooth G10, which they definitely could have improved on. It's a very simplistic handle face design. Basically, they just have one finger choil up here and then inward curve for the rest of your fingers down the back. Not much of a curved belly on the back to fill out the palm. It's relatively flat, but it still is a very comfortable handle because it's so long. Now, one thing I've always hated in blades with long handles is that they often come with a bad handle to blade length ratio, something with like, you know, a 5-inch handle and like a 2.5-inch blade. It's like a freaking, you know, sword handle with a little stick on the end. It's like laughable. It's comical. And I could never stand those. However, this really compensates for it with having such a wide blade. So definitely bonus points on that. Great blade design to compensate for a very long, comfortable handle. Another thing about this handle is the tang. You can see the tang actually is not just visible around the edges, but also is visible about 1.5 millimeters in all around the handle scales, which is great to provide a little more rounding around the edges. Now with this tang, it comes out the back with a lanyard hole right here. I never use lanyards. I think it takes up more space, it flies around, it's dinky. I don't like lanyards. If you do, more power to you. You can have one on this knife. Now on the back here, it comes to sort of an obtuse point. This might, under some circumstances, be able to break glass. However, I do not believe this was designed to be a window breaker. I was thinking about putting this to the grinder and maybe just grinding this into a nice sharp point to be a glass breaker, but I haven't gotten to that yet. Another thing about the handle scales is they're very simply held on with these star bolts, which is great because for a lot of people, if they want to very discreetly carry this, they don't want these bulky handle scales on there. It would be more practical to just have the bare steel. So in that case, you could just have something like this where there is no handle scales. It's just the entire knife is the tang. So that is an option with this still. Now another thing to be mentioned about the handle is it has a great thumb ramp right here with excellent jimping, very well exposed, very grippy. The only issue is it doesn't have a whole lot of guard from your hand slipping up onto the blade. So if you do stab with this, you're going to want to have a very tight grip. There's really not much that comes out right here, so it'd be very easy for your hand to slide up onto the blade. However, it does have an excellent thumb ramp. You can really choke up on it and get a lot of good intricate work done. Another thing to mention is it has this smaller choil right here before the bigger one. The purpose of that is so that you can sharpen the blade steel all the way to the end instead of just melding it into an increase. So that's definitely a plus in my book. Now I'm going to go over some comparison between this, my current primary fixed blade EDC, and this, my previous fixed blade EDC. Just some pros and cons of each, what they might be used for. If you look at these two knives side by side, they're very similar. Now this is listed as a 3.5-inch blade, this is listed as a 3.4-inch blade. Legally, both of these are concealable where I live. This one is a little easier to be concealed because it is a 3.4, so even if some cop does measure incorrectly, you have a little more room for error there. You're not bumping right up to the 3.5 mark. In terms of edge space, this actually has more edge space available than this knife because of the Tonto. The edge is making its way around more blade, so you're actually having more edge to work with, even though it's a shorter blade. Definitely a bonus in my opinion. Now back to the thumb ramp and guard. This clearly has a much better guard. Now there's a lot of stopping power right there to prevent your hand from coming up onto the blade. Now this doesn't have a great thumb ramp, it's just sort of a curve inconsistency. It's not a great thumb ramp, but it's functional. Another thing to mention is the tang. Obviously the tang is the handle for this knife. Now, one thing that's great about that is it makes for a thicker blade and a thicker tang. So I could easily see this knife being more durable and less likely to break. And the steel is, I think, superior on this blade. This is a 420 HC steel, which stands for high carbon. Now, I think these probably have about the same Rockwell hardness, maybe 56 to 58, which isn't great. But they're both mid-class 2 steels. I think this one is better actually because it has a greater edge retention. As I previously mentioned, this edge got beat down pretty bad. So another thing to mention is the sheath. Now if you look at the sheaths of these two knives, this is a nylon sheath. This is a huge sheath, full handle pad, which makes it very difficult to draw easily. And it's held in by a snap. It's not a lock-in sheath, it's not a pressure sheath, it's a snap. While a snap is very durable, the issue with that is that it's another thing to fumble with before you can access your knife. This, on the other hand, is an incredibly fast draw. It just comes straight in and out. It's not a pressure sheath, it actually snaps. So, basically, the plastic bends around the knife and locks it in. But it comes out very fast. I actually carry it like this on my right side and have a back hand grab. This knife is one of the fastest draws on a fixed blade EDC I've ever seen because there's no handle pad here. It's great. The knife handle is exposed enough for you to just grab it and wrench it out, ready to use right there. Very fast draw, very effective. One of the biggest reasons that the SCHF series is so fast on the draw is that with this inner curve, it naturally locks into the fingers. So it's very easy to grab a handle that is curving up like that if you're doing it in the back position, which is what I recommend. I don't prefer to have to reach onto my side and twist my hand back to grab like that. It's just not natural. And anything that's not natural isn't going to come quickly in a tactical situation. This is very natural, and it's right there for you to use. You don't need to fumble with any mechanisms. It's just push and pull. It's all you need to do. Great design there. However, this sheath does have some bonuses. While it is very difficult, if you can see, to draw this knife, while it's sitting straight up, you have to reach down, unsnap this, and then you can't just grab it because there's a handle pad there. So you have to sort of grab this and fumble it out. It's very slow, but this does have some benefits over this sheath. If you look at the rattle especially, this is a very loud rattling sheath. If you can hear that there, that's quite a lot of rattle and not even doing much. So that's definitely a huge downside, especially for a fixed blade EDC. If you're ever in a quiet situation, someone's going to hear this. Even when you're just walking, I've noticed it very, very prominently. Whereas with this, while there is a little bit of rattle, it's very little. So very little rattle on this. So it's much more silent, very big point there to be made. I think it might be easy to stop all that rattle or significantly decrease it by maybe gunking up this handle sheath part a little bit. Maybe, even just like a layer of duct tape. Something simple like that, maybe just enough to stop that rattle. By looking at it, I can tell definitely. I don't think it'll show up in the camera, but I can tell all the movement is coming from this section up here. This is pretty tight down there. So it could definitely be significantly reduced, if not completely eliminated, by just gunking up that a little bit. However, you definitely want to make sure not to gunk it up to the point where it doesn't click anymore because this section right here actually is the locking mechanism. Now another thing to mention about the sheath is the material. It's listed as GRN, which is glass reinforced nylon, which is also known as Zytel. However, in my long years of knife experience in handling Zytel, I can tell you this is not the traditional formula of GRN. This is definitely much more flexible. Originally, Zytel is a very glass-like substance. It's very hard, it is not flex, that would break. For example, in the SOG SEAL Team Elite, this is a complete solid chunk of Zytel. And you can hear that right there. It sounds just like glass, because it pretty much is. So I don't think this is the Zytel that we all know and love, but when it says online that this is GRN hard glass-filled nylon, don't expect it to come feeling like the other Zytel handles and sheaths that you know. However, one other thing is that I think this is actually a much more durable sheath than this would be. Simply because this is nylon, this is a soft sheath, so it's going to be ripped up easily. You scratch this against a rock, it could fray the strands. Scratch this up against a rock, it's going to, just bounce right off and maybe leave a scratch. It won't, hinder the structural durability of the sheath. So I think this is a very durable sheath. Excellent sheath design here. Now, it is also much more versatile. Obviously, you can't flip which way you want to draw this knife, and it only has this one dinky belt strap on the back, whereas this has this hard plastic screw-in belt loop. One thing to be mentioned about this, it does come with all these other holes, however they don't fit. I don't know why they didn't plan that out a little better. They totally could have had a better arrangement of holes here, but with how these 4 holes are spaced out, without drilling any more, these 2 holes can't even be used. It has to be these 2. I don't know why they did that. These are possibly just there for paracord and nothing more. But all you need is a screwdriver. It's very easy to change these out. Definitely a bonus there. Another thing that should be mentioned is this is a very long vertically belt loop hole, which is a very good thing. It allows for a lot of versatility. Now, to give you some perspective, this is the widest belt that I own. This is what I use every day. I prefer a wide, thick, tough belt. Even with the widest belt I own, there's still quite a lot of space, you can see right on the end there, for the belt to move around if need be, or if you have an even bigger belt than this. I find especially that if you just tighten your belt up, then this will pin it down and it doesn't move around a lot if you don't want to. However, it's easy to adjust, which is definitely a good thing for everyday carry. Now, one thing I would change about this sheath is the spacing. As you can see, the belt is spaced very far away from the actual knife. While that does help get the knife out quickly, the issue comes with concealment. Now, I've found no issues with just having a shirt fall over this, and it's very easily concealable, it's very low profile, just as if not easier than this one. But I would have preferred if they had bumped this all the way up to that edge right there. That would have been much more concealable. Now, another thing to be noted on the spacing, this did come with its own spacers. Here are the spacers it came with. Obviously, you can see they're quite thick, space the sheath quite a ways from your belt. So I made my own spacers. I cut them out of just 1-ply chipboard, and they've been working much better. It keeps the knife much closer to your body. So great versatility and customizability in this knife and sheath. I mean, final look at these 2 knives, which one's better for fixed blade EDC carry. Better, I don't know if there is a better one. They're just different. This is going to be better for tactical use. This is an incredibly fast draw, let me tell you. If you have anything that needs to be done, it's just right there. Whereas this, you're fumbling and you have to reach around the back, whereas this, it's right there, already in a easily grabbed position. Also, the Tonto point is great for tactical use. In terms of a field knife, I think these are actually equally hard to sharpen. And people think, why? This has a continuous blade edge. The reason is, while this is a tanto, which is usually very hard to sharpen, this is a recurve. Recurves are incredibly hard to sharpen on a flat stone because with a traditional blade design, you're supposed to be able to just rotate it down the stone, and you'll be getting every part of the edge. With a recurve, the stone is skipping over parts that you can't access because of that recurve. So this is very hard to sharpen on a flat stone. So sharpenability, they're equal in my book. This has more edge to work with than this. Bonus points over that. This is more tactical usability. Bonus points for that. This is a thicker tang. Definitely points for durability in the field. Another thing, this can be used as a throwing knife because it's one piece of steel. I don't think this would be as effectively used as a throwing knife because these handle scales are very bulky, set off the balance, and that balancing point is not very good. This would not throw very well. Whereas this has a relatively centered balancing point. This would throw quite well. I do regularly practice throwing this knife. It does very well. So this definitely has points for being able to be a throwing knife. Now, bonus points here for the handguard safety. However, this has a better thumb ramp, so I think it about evens out with the handle safety. However, this has a possible window breaker. Even though they both have lanyard holes, this has G10 handle scales, definitely better handle here. So I think in my book this blade wins for a fixed blade EDC. While this does have less rattle, this is just better on the draw. It's so fast to draw that in a tactical situation, that's huge. Especially when when adrenaline is pumping, all your focus is going to be on the threat. And I know this from experience. You don't have the wits about you to be fumbling with mechanisms like a snap or a strap or Velcro or, trying to flip it around into the right grip. You just don't have time for that. So that's huge with this. If you're looking for a tactical EDC, this is great. It's just a fast draw, already in usable position right there. So great fixed blade EDC, fantastic knife for $31. While this is a slightly more expensive knife, you can get this one for about $10 less than this knife, but I think it is definitely worth it. All in all, this is an excellent fixed blade EDC. It served me well in the past few months I've had it. If you're looking for a fixed blade EDC, I would definitely go this direction because it's cheap, along with that philosophy of use. Like I mentioned in my last video on the Gerber Paraframe 2, you're a lot more likely to use a knife and be willing to destroy it in the name of use if you didn't spend a lot of money on it. So definitely a great EDC knife that you're not afraid to abuse. So yeah, I'll give you guys a close-up of the knife. So there's that wicked tanto tip with a nice beastly tactical swedge up top. The high-running thick blade face coming past the secondary point. Slight hollow grind all the way down. There's the Schrade engraving. There's the thumb ramp jimping, the mini choil and the larger finger choil. Here's that G10 handle scale Rocky Mountain pattern. There's the lanyard hole with the window breaker, possibly full tang visible all the way around. And there are those screws to take out those handle scales if you so desire. Here on the other side, there's the SCHF15 lettering. So yeah, this is the Schrade SCHF15 Tanto fixed blade everyday carry knife. $31.92 on Amazon with free shipping. Thank you very much for listening, guys. Please comment, rate, and subscribe.